Hi, I'm Josh at the Journey Church, and we're making our way through Romans Disarmed in order to liberate Paul's letter and our communities in the face of structural oppression. Chapter 8 is the Pax Romana and the Gospel of Peace. What we have discussed throughout these videos is about living in a way that is contrary to the ideas and expectations of empire. If we live more and more in keeping with such a gospel vision, we will surely butt up against a state that demands subservience. So how is such a conflict in keeping with common readings of chapter 13 of the letter of Romans? Chapter 13 has often been read as Paul telling us to obey state authorities. And if you just read chapter 13, verses 1 to 7 in isolation, that probably would be the takeaway. But this becomes an impossible way of interpreting the text as soon as you step outside of that. It bears no coherence with the rest of the letter, with the chapter that's just preceded it, or even Paul's life. He wrote other letters from prison. We can be distracted by Paul saying that governing authorities get their authority from God, missing the fact that that is in itself an anti-imperialist statement. Paul is rejecting the theology of the empire and the gods it worshipped and saying that the empire's authority is subordinate to the authority of the Lord they murdered as a criminal. All is upside down. Paul goes on in chapter 13 to say this: whatever other commandment there may be, they are summed up in this one rule: love your neighbour as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbour, therefore love is the fulfilment of the law. So all of the laws of the state should be evaluated against the higher law, love. Any laws that contravene love cannot be supported, and obedience to the higher law of love requires resistance and rejection of the laws that contravene love. To imagine that blanket obedience to the Roman Empire could be in alignment with commitment to the kingdom of Jesus is surely either to not know the Roman Empire or to not know the kingdom of Jesus. And Paul is writing to people who know the Roman Empire and suffer at its hands, and he is writing a letter to help them create communities that live counter to that kingdom in favour of the kingdom of Jesus. And unless Paul is taking a 7-verse break in which to say the exact opposite of what he has been saying in the rest of the letter, the authors say we have to hear a tone of irony in these words. If obedience is wrought through violence and threat, then assuaging authorities out of fear and out of respect is kind of a false distinction. And yet violence is serious business. On the one hand, Paul encourages us to prepare ourselves for hardship and costly discipleship. Bringing justice to our lives will require sacrificing much that we might currently hold dear, as we've already considered. But to take a stand for justice in a world of injustice can mean greater sacrifices than that. On the other hand, Paul's words regarding authority can also be understood in the context of those whose lives are constantly at threat. We live under a nation state that perpetuates horrific violence and oppression against vast numbers of people, both here in the UK and overseas in foreign policy and trade. For those that live under a hovering Roman sword, we must be careful not to cause unnecessary pain. It is at times best to give honour, by which I mean due concern, to those authorities who claim honour. But I think that Paul is encouraging us to live with an expectation that living for Jesus in a world like ours will cost us something. How we navigate, resist, and respond to authorities will take discernment and strategy. But disobedience there is not a moral issue. Our allegiance in all things is to love. Believing in Jesus' resurrection is about believing that a more just world is possible. in which we don't put our hope in inherently violent state systems to protect us, but instead believe that a different vision of peace is possible, encouraged by Jesus' resurrection and realised among communities of his Spirit.